I've always believed that the worst wounds are the ones we never show. Maybe it's because I grew up watching people pretend they were okay even when everything inside them was falling apart. I remember seeing my aunt whisper to my mother in the kitchen late one night, trying to hide the tremble in her voice after discovering her husband had been living a double life. I was too young to understand the depth of that pain, but old enough to recognize the look of someone who suddenly didn't know who they were anymore. And for some reason, that memory came back to me the first time I heard Elena Carter tell her story. Because everything she lived felt like a reflection of every hidden heartbreak the world tries so hard to bury. Elena always said she met Michael Hayes on a day she'd least expected anything good to happen. She was walking home from work under a sky heavy with rain. The kind of rain that makes you feel like the world is washing something off your shoulders. Her job at the design firm had been wearing her down for months, draining her creativity and stretching her patience so thin she could hear it tearing. But that day, as she hurried down the street with her jacket over her head, she collided with a stranger who apologized in a voice so warm it almost felt rehearsed. Michael. He offered her his umbrella with a smile that made her forget, for a moment, how exhausted she was. Elena didn't know it yet, but that smile would become the opening line of the greatest lie ever told to her. They walked together until the rain softened, their conversation unfolding with the kind of ease people search their whole lives for. Michael asked about her dreams, her fears, her favorite colors, her childhood memories, questions that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in years. And Elena, who'd spent most of her adult life believing that life didn't offer people like her anything extraordinary, began to imagine that maybe she had simply been waiting for the right person to show up. Michael told her he admired women with ambition. He said he loved how her eyes lit up when she talked about art. He promised her that he saw something in her that other people were too blind to notice. And for Elena, those words felt like sunlight breaking through the thickest clouds. But here's the thing about people who lie beautifully. They know exactly where the cracks are. Elena let him in with a vulnerability she protected for years. Her apartment, once filled with unfinished projects and lonely dinners, became a place where she cooked for two, laughed more than she slept, and believed she was building a future with someone who truly understood her. She remembered the way Michael would wrap his arms around her from behind while she painted, telling her she smelled like vanilla and hope. She remembered how he pulled her close during thunderstorms, as if the sound of the sky breaking open was something they faced together. She remembered believing him. What she didn't know was that these moments, these perfectly tailored memories, were building blocks of a facade he had crafted long before he met her. The first fracture appeared quietly, almost politely. One night, Michael told her he had to work late, but Elena, who had forgotten her sketchbook at his apartment, decided to surprise him by dropping by the office. When she arrived, the lights were off. His car wasn't there, and the security guard greeted her with confusion when she asked if Michael was still upstairs. He hadn't worked late at all. Elena didn't confront him that night. Instead, she sat in her car staring at the empty parking lot, trying to convince herself that maybe there was a reasonable explanation, that maybe she was overthinking it, that maybe she was just tired. People who want to believe a lie will search for reasons to keep it alive. But the second fracture wasn't so silent. She found a text message on his phone 2 weeks later. Not a friendly one, not a harmless one. A message from a woman named Rachel, thanking him for an amazing night and begging him to come back. This time, the denial didn't come so easily. Elena felt something inside her collapse, slowly at first, like a building losing its foundation. She remembered staring at the screen for so long that her hands went numb, the words blurring until they felt like smoke. She wasn't angry yet, that came later. What she felt in that moment was disbelief, a desperate plea rising in her chest. Please let there be an explanation that doesn't destroy me. When Michael came home and saw the phone in her hand, he froze. For a second, something real flickered in his eyes, fear perhaps, but then he slipped back into the role he played so well. He told her Rachel was an ex who didn't understand boundaries. He said nothing had happened. He said Elena was the only woman he loved. Lies, when spoken with enough confidence, can sound like truths. Elena remembered her aunt's shaking voice in that kitchen from so many years ago, and suddenly the memory didn't feel distant. It felt like a warning she had never understood until now. But even then, she didn't walk away. Because people don't leave when they first see the truth, they leave when they stop fighting the lie. For the next few weeks, Elena watched him more closely. She noticed the way he guarded his phone, the new passwords, the inconsistency in his stories. Every detail felt like another thread pulling apart the fabric of their life together. And yet, she still clung to the hope that she was mistaken. Hope is cruel that way, it makes you hold on to the knife that's hurting you. The breaking point came on a Thursday. Elena heard laughter, female laughter, coming from the background of a call he claimed was from his boss. She froze, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear the rest of the conversation. When he hung up, she confronted him again, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and realization. And that's when Michael said the words that would shatter her completely. "Elena, you're overreacting. We're not married. Love doesn't have to mean everything to both people." He said it so casually, so effortlessly, as if he were stating a fact she should have already understood. Love doesn't have to mean everything to both people. Elena felt something snap. Not in anger. Not in desperation. In clarity. She saw him, not the version she'd built in her mind, not the man he pretended to be, but the truth behind all of it. He had never loved her. He had loved her devotion, her softness, her belief in him. He had loved the version of her that made him feel powerful. But Elena realized something else that night. She had been powerful long before he ever existed. In the days that followed, she didn't cry as much as she expected. Instead, she observed. She listened. She pieced together the truth behind every moment he had manipulated her into believing. And slowly, quietly, she began to build something new inside herself. A version of Elena he never anticipated. She stopped texting him first. Stopped waiting for his calls. Stopped rearranging her life around the possibility of him needing her. Instead, she woke up early and started painting again. Not the soft, dreamy pieces she used to make for him, but bold strokes, sharp contrasts, colors that clashed and collided like storms on canvas. She wasn't trying to heal. She was reclaiming. One night, she looked at her reflection and barely recognized herself. Not because she looked broken, but because she looked awake. She realized that the woman staring back at her wasn't the fragile version Michael had shaped. She was someone who could walk away without looking back. She became the woman he feared most. A woman who didn't need him. And that's when Michael felt the shift. He tried calling, texting, insisting that he loved her, begging her to meet him. The irony was almost poetic. The moment she no longer wanted him was the moment he realized he had lost control. But Elena didn't respond. Not out of spite, but because she no longer spoke the language of his lies. Still, the universe has a strange way of preparing people for final confrontations they never asked for. Elena saw him again 3 weeks later, unexpectedly, at a coffee shop she used to visit on her lunch breaks. He approached her with the same smile he had used the day they met, but she didn't feel warmth this time. She felt nothing. And sometimes nothing is the strongest thing a person can feel. He tried to touch her arm. She stepped back. He tried to explain himself. She didn't listen. He tried to remind her of the moments they had shared. But those memories belonged to someone she no longer was. Elena looked him in the eyes and said only this: "You lied about loving me, but you taught me something important. I don't need to be loved by someone who fears a woman who knows her worth." It wasn't revenge. It wasn't anger. It was truth. And truth, when spoken without fear, is a kind of freedom. As I listened to Elena tell this part of her story, I couldn't help thinking back to all the people I've watched rebuild themselves after having their hearts broken by someone who didn't deserve them. There's a quiet beauty in that kind of transformation. A strength that doesn't need to shout. And Elena was only at the beginning of hers. This was the moment her real story began. Elena didn't tell many people what happened after that day in the coffee shop. Not because she wanted to hide, and not because she was ashamed. It was because, for the first time in a long time, she felt like the story she was living belonged entirely to her. There's something sacred about rebuilding yourself quietly. It's almost like planting a garden in the dark. No one sees the process, but everyone sees the bloom. She went back home that evening and sat in front of a blank canvas. Not because she needed an escape, but because she wanted to see what her hands would create now that they no longer trembled for someone else's approval. The brush felt different this time. Steadier. Honest. She didn't choose the colors. She let them choose her. Bright reds with unapologetic edges, deep blues that looked like the ocean after a storm, and strokes of gold that felt like little fragments of the strength she had found inside herself. She called the painting after the lie. When she finished, she stepped back and realized something important. The art she was creating now wasn't just expression. It was transformation. Every stroke was a truth she had never allowed herself to speak. Every shade felt like reclaiming a part of herself Michael had tried to rewrite. That night, she slept without checking her phone once. Meanwhile, Michael was experiencing something he never prepared himself for. The absence of control. He wasn't used to silence. He wasn't used to being ignored, especially not by someone who had once given him her entire heart. For men like him, losing devotion feels like losing oxygen. And Elena's silence suffocated him more than any confrontation ever could. He started showing up at her apartment building, waiting in his car, hoping she would walk by. Elena saw him once through the blinds, but instead of panicking or rushing to hide, she simply turned away and continued what she was doing. She had learned that attention, whether positive or negative, was its own kind of power. The most freeing thing she could do was give him none. Days passed, then a week, then two. Elena felt herself growing lighter, as if every sunrise peeled away another layer of the weight she had carried. She picked up new hobbies, went back to her morning jogs, rediscovered her favorite coffee spot, and even signed up for a weekend art retreat outside the city. She didn't go looking for a new life, she built one. But stories like hers aren't linear. Healing never is. One evening, while cleaning out an old drawer, she found a small box Michael had given her months earlier. A bracelet he claimed reminded him of her delicate spirit. She remembered how those words once made her feel cherished. Now they made her feel misjudged. She wasn't delicate. She wasn't fragile. She wasn't someone to be shaped according to someone else's comfort. Elena held the bracelet in her palm for several long seconds before setting it down gently, not out of sentiment but out of closure. She didn't need dramatic gestures or symbolic destruction. She only needed the quiet decision that it no longer held meaning. The next day, something unexpected happened. Something that would force Elena to confront the last piece of the story she hadn't yet faced. Rachel reached out to her. The same Rachel from the text messages. The same woman whose name had shattered Elena's illusion. She sent a long message apologizing, admitting she didn't know Elena existed, confessing that Michael had told her he was single. Rachel said she had ended things with him after discovering the truth, and that she needed Elena to know she wasn't part of the betrayal intentionally. Elena sat with the message for a long time. It was strange. This woman had once been the symbol of her heartbreak, the proof of Michael's lies. But now that she saw the truth clearly, she felt no anger toward her. She actually felt something closer to empathy. They had both been misled by the same man. They had both been fed the same carefully crafted stories. She typed a response that was brief but sincere. "You didn't hurt me. He did." Rachel replied a few minutes later, thanking her and wishing her peace. And in that moment, Elena felt something unbind inside her. Another thread of pain stitching itself closed. Weeks turned into a month. Elena continued painting, continued rebuilding, continued rediscovering the parts of herself she had long neglected. She even began preparing for her first small gallery showcase. A suggestion from one of her mentors, who noticed a remarkable shift in the depth of her new pieces. She didn't tell anyone this, but she felt like she was painting her way back to life. It was on the day of the gallery event that she encountered Michael one final time. She hadn't seen him in weeks. She assumed he had finally given up. But as she stepped out of her car with her portfolio case in hand, she saw him standing by the entrance of the building. His clothes were disheveled, his eyes tired, his expression a mixture of desperation and something that looked like regret, but a regret born not from love, but from losing control. "Elena," he called out quietly, almost cautiously. She paused. Not out of fear, not out of longing, but out of the need to finally hear what he thought he could say after all this time. He approached slowly, as if stepping closer required courage he'd never needed before. "I know I messed up," he said. "I know I hurt you, but I didn't think you'd actually walk away. I didn't think you'd just disappear from my life." Elena held her portfolio a little tighter, not because she was nervous, but because she was grounding herself in the life she had built without him. "I didn't disappear," she said. "You just stopped being a part of my world." Michael looked down, shaking his head. I miss you. I miss us. I didn't mean to lose you. Elena studied him. Not the way she once had, searching for good, searching for truth, searching for hope. Now she simply saw him as he was, small, insecure, desperate for validation, terrified of losing the power he once held. She realized then that Michael didn't fear losing her love. He feared losing the version of her he could control. And she was no longer that woman. I don't think you ever had me, she said softly. You had the person I thought I needed to be for you. But that version of me doesn't exist anymore. Michael blinked, taken aback by the calmness in her voice. So that's it? You're just done. Elena breathed in, exhaled slowly, and nodded. Yes, I'm done. There was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation, no tears, just truth, clean and sharp like a blade removing the last thread of attachment. Michael stepped back, realizing the finality of her words. He looked at her as if seeing her for the first time, not the soft, fragile woman he believed he could manipulate, but a woman who stood firmly in her own identity, a woman who no longer feared losing someone who had never truly been hers. A woman he feared because he could no longer control her. Elena, he whispered, but his voice trailed off. There was nothing left to say. She walked past him without another word, her footsteps steady, her shoulders relaxed, her heart unburdened. The gallery doors opened before her, as if inviting her into the next chapter of her life. Inside, her paintings hung beautifully on the walls. People moved from piece to piece, admiring the raw emotion, the bold colors, the unapologetic depth of her work. Elena stood in the center of it all, feeling a quiet triumph bloom in her chest. These paintings weren't about Michael. They weren't about heartbreak. They were about rebirth. They were about her. Later that night, as the crowd thinned and the lights dimmed, she found herself alone with her thoughts. She realized she had become the woman she needed to be. Not out of revenge, not out of anger, but out of growth. She had become the woman Michael feared most because she had become the woman she once feared she could never be. A woman who chose herself. A woman who healed. A woman who walked away. Looking back, Elena understood something important. Heartbreak doesn't destroy you. It reveals you. And sometimes the person you become afterward is stronger, braver, and more extraordinary than the person you were before. She left the gallery with a quiet smile, the night air cool against her skin, her heart filled with a peace she once believed she would never feel again. And for the first time in a long time, Elena didn't look back. When I think about Elena's story now, I'm reminded of how many people rise from the very places they thought would break them. I've seen it happen in real life more times than I can count. Someone walks through fire and somehow comes out reshaped instead of ruined. Elena wasn't defined by Michael's lies. She was defined by what she built afterward. And maybe that's the message hidden inside her journey. Sometimes we become our strongest selves not despite the heartbreak, but because of what it forces us to discover. Her story stays with me long after the ending,